Do you ever think about one small problem for hours, replay scenarios in your head, and still feel stuck? Overthinking isn't a personality flaw. It's a mental loop your brain learned, and you can actually break it. And if you really pause for a moment, you may notice how familiar this feels. The conversation you replay on your way home, the decision you revisit again and again, the future scenario you rehearse in your mind, as if preparing for something that hasn't even happened yet. Sometimes it starts quietly, just one thought, and then somehow it multiplies. One possibility leads to another, then another, and before you know it, your mind is crowded with questions that have no clear answers. Over time, many people begin to believe this is just who they are. I'm an overthinker. But often, what we call overthinking is something the mind learned long ago, usually as a way to feel safe. If you look closely at how this pattern forms, it often begins in environments where uncertainty felt uncomfortable or even threatening. Maybe mistakes were heavily criticized. Maybe emotional reactions from others were unpredictable. Maybe you learned early that being prepared, mentally prepared, could protect you from embarrassment, conflict, or failure. So the brain adapts. It starts scanning, analyzing, predicting. It tells you, think more, and you'll stay in control. And yet, something interesting happens here. The brain begins to confuse thinking with solving. It assumes that more analysis will eventually create certainty, but life rarely offers that kind of certainty. So the mind keeps going and going. Psychologically, this is what we call rumination, a repetitive loop of thinking that feels purposeful but rarely leads to resolution. You may notice how it carries a sense of urgency, almost like your mind is saying, "Don't stop thinking yet, the answer is close." But often, the answer never arrives, only more questions. There's also something deeper happening in the body. When uncertainty appears, a difficult decision, a social interaction, an unclear future, the brain activates its threat system. Stress hormones rise. Your body becomes alert. Thinking feels intense, necessary, immediate. The mind isn't just reflecting, it's trying to protect you. But often, this protection comes at a cost. You might notice how overthinking drains your energy without producing action. You rehearse conversations but never say the words. You analyze options but delay decisions. You imagine outcomes so vividly that the emotional exhaustion arrives before the experience even happens. It feels like effort, it feels productive, and yet nothing moves. Sometimes people who overthink are seen by others as careful, thoughtful, even wise, and in many ways they are. But internally, the experience is very different. There's a quiet restlessness, a constant background noise of what-ifs, a subtle fear of making the wrong choice. And this connects to something psychologists call intolerance of uncertainty, the difficulty of accepting that not everything can be predicted or controlled. For the overthinking mind, uncertainty feels like danger, so thinking becomes the attempt to eliminate that danger. But often, the more you think, the more uncertainty you discover. Have you ever noticed how a simple decision, what to say, what to choose, what step to take, slowly expands into endless possibilities? Each possibility creates a new branch of imagined outcomes. The brain, trying to resolve tension, keeps searching for the perfect answer. But perfection is rarely available, so the search continues. And here's the hidden reinforcement that keeps the cycle alive. When you worry or analyze, even briefly, you feel a small sense of relief, the feeling that you're doing something. That temporary relief teaches the brain that overthinking works, so next time anxiety appears, the mind returns to the same strategy. It's a learned loop. Breaking that loop doesn't happen by forcing thoughts to disappear. Thoughts, after all, are part of being human. The shift begins with noticing the process itself, recognizing when the mind is solving a problem versus when it is circling one. Sometimes this starts with something very simple, labeling the experience. You might quietly tell yourself, this is overthinking, not judging it, not fighting it, just observing. And strangely, this small act creates space between you and the mental storm. Other times, change happens through behavior rather than thought, acting before feeling fully certain, making a decision with incomplete information, allowing discomfort to exist without immediately trying to analyze it away. These moments teach the brain something new, that uncertainty can be tolerated, that action can occur without perfect clarity. At first, this feels unnatural. The mind resists. It says, think a little more. But gradually, a different pattern forms. The urge to analyze loosens. The need for absolute certainty softens. And yet, even as these changes happen, you may still notice the old tendencies returning during stress or emotional moments. That's normal. The mind remembers familiar pathways. It returns to what once felt protective. But perhaps the deeper realization is this: overthinking was never a sign of weakness. It was the mind's attempt to care, to prepare, to stay safe in a world that often feels unpredictable. The very habit that now exhausts you once helped you navigate uncertainty. And when you begin to see it this way, something shifts. The struggle becomes softer. The relationship with your thoughts becomes more curious than critical. Because sometimes the mind doesn't need more answers. Sometimes it simply needs permission to be uncertain, to pause, to let a question remain unfinished. And in that quiet space where not everything is resolved, you may notice something unexpected, a sense of stillness that was always there just beneath the noise of constant thinking.